more discussion about Facebook on the congressional hot seat, and remembering Steve Jobs 10 years later. This is Mac Voices. This edition of Mac Voices is supported by MacVoices Magazine, our free magazine on Flipboard. Updated daily with the best articles on the web to help you do more with your Apple tech and beyond, MacVoices Magazine content is available in the free Flipboard app, on the web, or in your favorite RSS reader. Visit MacVoicesMagazine.com for details. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in a 3-part Mac Voices live discussion. In part 1, we started talking about the Facebook whistleblower, the congressional hearings, and why things might be a little bit different this time. That discussion continues in this part, part 2, and we also take a look at Steve Jobs on the 10-year anniversary of his death, what he all meant to us, what he meant to the industry and the world as well. So let's go back and let the panel do the talking.
You can maybe use Facebook if you just stay to the groups, but Facebook is making it very, very hard to do that. Facebook is pushing you towards the stream, the home stream, and to look at other people's content. That's what they're pushing you to.
You look at your friends' content and you look at advertising. That's what you look at. Or the groups that you're in. Unless you're doing. Unless
have you checked the Facebook timeline? They're not just showing your friends' content. They're showing a lot of other stuff too.
Yes,
it's not just advertising.
I haven't seen anything I don't like to see.
Okay, well then, Warren, you're the exception because
I see tons of stuff, all kinds of questions, trying to figure out what security passwords are, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
As Kelly knows, I work with a lot of old people who, this is how they keep in touch with their family, and it's a good thing. I work with, I grew up with an old person who happened to be my parents. This is a way to keep in touch with us and my brothers. That's what we're doing.
Okay. And remember that all of this stuff, all of these social media platforms going all the way back to the 90s, for the most part, have all been free, as far as you not paying any money to use them, which means that the money for servers and bandwidth and everything else has to come from somewhere. So that's what Facebook does. That's what AOL did. That's what all of these companies did. And unless people are willing to pay for a social media service that isn't going to mine their data, that isn't going to take the stuff that they give them and force engagement like all of these social media companies do, then Facebook goes away, and what are we left with? Facebook.
Right. And the next Facebook will be Apple to come up, and we wanted Apple to come up with something like this, and they tried, and it failed. But an Apple-based, social network that's part of their iCloud.
Well, the last time they tried that, Apple had like less than 5% of the entire marketplace,
and are cheap.
And I think tried is doing an awful lot of work in that sentence. It was limited to music and no.
But even if Apple made an iCloud-based Facebook, right? And it's been tried. It's been tried with Nextdoor. It's been tried with LinkedIn in a sense, and LinkedIn is its own thing. But, if Apple came up with something that was exactly like Facebook with no advertising and no data collecting, it would be a ghost town. Because, people are cheap. There's a lot of people who don't have the money to pay for whatever. And, the world's big. And, as you said, there's countries that, live on these free apps. And this is why they use Android with these shady apps, because they, they don't have the money to spend. And they want to keep in touch with their, family and friends.
That's been a great conversation. Okay. We'll be right back after this.
Well, before we go, Mark wants to say one more thing, but I also want to get the chat room in here. Webb and Guy have been having a conversation back and forth, but Webb added, Reddit did testify before Congress regarding the GameStop stock trading. Mm-hmm. And he says, for the record, I'm not a Facebook fan, but I'm looking at this from a corporate perspective. And, I guess, Webb, I'm kind of with you. I'm looking at it from the corporate perspective, but also from the user perspective. And I do think, and this is not going to be popular, folks, but I do feel like there's a bit of responsibility on each of us for not maybe managing ourselves a little bit better and our use of some of these platforms. Because I really do, because I don't feel like my Facebook or no, scratch that. I feel like there are places I go on Facebook that are fine. The feed itself is questionable. My Twitter feed is about 85 to 90% clean and free of emotional stuff, unless, one of my friends just happens to pop something off. But, I don't subscribe to those people. I just don't. I avoid it. Mark, you get the last word.
Yeah, okay. I would say that in many ways, I agree with Warren that Facebook, it does unite people, does help families and others reach out and connect. It also does have negative aspects. I think the reality is that as a business, whether you agree with how they've built it or not, they have something that's tremendously powerful that business wants. So I don't see it really going away. I'm not quite sure what Congress might or might not do. Even in the worst case, they do something and Zuckerberg needs to resign. I think whoever will take it over will right the ship in many ways and keep the thing going forward. So it's sort of like for internet age. Again, I think both Guy and Warren have been saying, and is that people don't want to pay money for it; they want it to be free. So how does it monetize? It's either they show you ads like Google does based on what you search for, from which they discern, oh, he must be interested in an XYZ type of product, or they base it on who you know and the stuff that you're interested in, as you demonstrate to Facebook by your likes and your interaction with other people. So I think in many ways, like it or not, it's just a reflection of our own human nature. And it's probably nothing new to say that interpersonally, I don't think people would be as assholic to each other as they are on Facebook. It's just that they're just typing away at a keyboard. So they're not seeing the person across the table with them. Because and I think again that's it's an amplifier of bad behavior as well as good. And
anonymity makes people brave.
Right. And I think with that, I'm done and back to Chuck or anyone else.
All right, well, let's move on. I did think that it was important to talk a little bit about this because it's been in the news, and it seems like, for the first time, or maybe for the second time, there's been some objective proof. Now we're back before Congress. Let's see if it has any effect. But at the end of the day, this may be one of those things like the financial crisis where certain entities are too big to fail, and we'll just have to wait and see. There was some discussion in the chat room about talking about Steve Jobs, and I'm all for that. And I've kind of want to start that conversation off though with Brittany, because a few weeks ago, Brittany really surprised me that Steve Jobs she knew from Pixar. She had never really paid attention to Steve Jobs as Apple, and I thought that was really interesting because she's 1 or 2 years younger than most of the panel here. And so she had a different perspective on it. So Brittany, from where you sit, I mean, now that you've heard us all talking about it, you've probably read a lot of stuff. What do you think of Steve Jobs' tenure at Apple?
I've heard a lot since. Yeah. Like people have reminiscing like here, and it sounds cool. He's a founder, and a founder is different than a CEO who is not a founder, and they're different jobs, and pretending like they're the same job is not realistic for anybody involved. But I didn't know him. I mean, I didn't use Apple products when he was CEO. I mean, I used them towards the end, I guess, but I didn't follow Apple yet. So yeah, I don't know how to answer the question, I guess.
Okay, well that's fine. I mean, again, it seems so alien to everybody. Well, except maybe Jay, everybody on the show that,
yeah, I'm not younger than everybody here.
You would not have, well, I was saying that because of Jay's other predilections, but we're not going to go there.
What does that mean?
See, now I want to go there.
No, go, Brittany, go.
Go,
Brittany. Go, Brittany.
I didn't follow Apple when he was a CEO. Like, yeah, there are some interesting stories. Some of them are fun.
Some are not.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've heard a lot of great stories about a bunch of rich people before that. Cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Steve Jobs was an amazing man with the power to say no when everybody else wanted him to say yes. He was a visionary. I'm glad that he was CEO of Apple. I'm glad he had a position of power in tech. And I thank God every day I never had to work for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And I came into Apple towards the end of his tenure. I was a PC user. I wasn't in the computer industry for most of the 90s. And then I came on board like around 2004 or 2005 is when I actually finally first owned my first Mac, and then I haven't left ever since. And that's what was my memory of. Well, actually, no, I take that back. The iPad, when the iPod came out, that I did have an iPod, so I guess I can count that as some of the influence of Apple. I always think about it because of Mac. I never really had a Mac, but I think the iPod really just blew my mind. And when Steve Jobs came up on that stage, when he showed that first iPod, it holds 5,000 songs, and that was an exciting thing that happened when I saw that. And then after that, it just kept progressing on throughout the years. And he was a very very inspirational guy. But like I agree with Guy, all the stories I heard, we all heard is to be tough to work for him.
I love the idea.
Oh,
go ahead, Patrice. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I came in even later than David, like 2008-ish, I want to say.
Yeah.
Honestly, the first memory I have of Steve Jobs is 2010, the iPad announcement. That's the first time, like, I remember him seeing, like, I had the iPhone before, like in 2008, I want to say, but I didn't connect Apple and Steve Jobs at all. Like, I mean, honestly, here in Europe, Apple wasn't a thing until, the iPhone, basically. I mean, there were Macs here and there, but like I remember going to school, like university and stuff, and that was the first time in 2006. That was the first time I even saw a Mac in my entire life. Never heard of the iPod. Never heard of the Mac before. Like that's the world I grew up in. Like David said, like the PC world. So
I totally want to give props to anybody that can create culture and style and design and can perpetuate that. So by all means, sweet, awesome, great. At the same time, I've learned not to put a lot of thought in the people that make the products, but the products themselves, because I think anybody can have a great idea. Unfortunately, not anybody can execute on that idea. But at the same time, my entry into Apple was all the people that had money had it. I didn't have money, so I didn't have it. When I got money, I said, I'm going to get it. And I'm a part of that continuation of a problem. But to me, I didn't care who made it. But that said, I mean, he meant a lot to a lot of people. So I respect that about him. But at the end of the day, I think the things that we create are more important than the people that we are. So, thank you to him for making something that gave me drive and ambition.
Jim, you scolded Steve Jobs?
I did.
Jim,
For
you're my
what?
hero.
Yeah. For what did you scold Steve Jobs?
For yelling at my receptionist.
Fair.
So,
And survived.
I met him a couple of times in 1984. One time was at an Apple sales conference in Hawaii, and that was sort of not really a meeting, but said hello. And so, I came out with my first Mac program in August of 84, which was Overview. So it was, I think, the 7th program for the Mac. There wasn't much software for the computer. And so I guess Steve got his hands on it. So this is a database program. And he didn't like the fact that if you wanted to put a date into it, it wouldn't type the slashes for you automatically. You had to type the slashes. So he was like, that sucks, as I'm sure we can all imagine. So he called up our company, and I wasn't there when he called. So he berated Robin, who answered the phone. So, and when I got back, she's like, "Who is this Steve Cobb guy? Why does he hate us? Why does he hate me?" So about a month after that, I was working the Apple booth in Las Vegas for Comdex, because back in those days, they, since there were so few little amount of software, they used to have us, do things like that and include us in promotions. And so I was, working the booth, and he kind of came walking by, and he was going to walk past me, and I'm like, "Oh, I need to talk to you." And he's sort of like, "What?" And I'm like, "Hey, that wasn't cool, So if you want to get mad at me, that's fine. And by the way, that feature that you wanted, it already was put in. It's going to be in the, it's in the beta. It'll be out in January. But, in the meantime, it's not cool for you to get mad at somebody that had nothing to do with that." And he was just sort of like, "Oh, well, it should work that way." So,
you help make him a better person.
No, I don't. I was not very impressed. But there's a lot of stories later that obviously it was tough to work for, but I also knew some people that not direct reports, but a couple levels down that did work with him a lot, and they had good things to say about him. And they're like, "Yeah, he was tough, but if you knew what you were doing and stood your ground," he said, "if you're afraid of him, then he would just eat you up. But if you knew, and said, 'No, you're wrong,' he would be like, 'Oh.'" So, yeah. So, but I'm probably glad that I didn't work for him. But like I say, I did meet, I have met a number of people that did work with him and were like, "Yeah, it was great. That was the best thing I ever did." So who knows?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people stayed for a really long time with him. So, I mean, there must be something to that. Like, they wouldn't do that if he was really bad.
That's a great point.
I think, he clearly was a great, he had a great eye for talent, and he did surround himself with A-level people, and apparently was able to motivate them. So, you see a lot of people that surround themselves with C-level people so they look good, and he clearly did not do that.
Jeff, you said that you have thoughts.
Of course I have thoughts. How could I not? We're talking about Steve Jobs. Okay. Steve Jobs was no saint. Steve Jobs does not deserve to be deified. Steve Jobs was a horrible person to a lot of people. Yep. He ruined lives, and he was a bad man to a lot of people. I would like to think that later in his life, he, like the Grinch, had a heart that grew 3 sizes and became a much better person. But I never knew him personally, so I can't say. So with that glowing introduction to Steve, I will say he was really good at being the visionary, and he was really good at finding the right people, like Jim was saying, to put around him so that he could take his vision and make it a reality. And without that in the beginning, then we would not have the Apple we have today. We probably wouldn't have Apple at all. And I'm glad that we have choice in major computer platforms, because I would just hate to think that there just simply wasn't a choice and you just got whatever was there, which probably wouldn't be Windows, it would be something else. And we'd be happy with it or maybe not, but I'm glad.
Well, you wouldn't know the difference.
I would know the difference.
Matter.
Yeah.
It wouldn't matter if you were or not, because you don't have an option otherwise.
Right. So I'm glad that that Steve was able to be part of a movement that created, or he was able to be part of the technology industry at a time when he could make a difference and the people around him could make a difference. So that part's great. But wow, Steve and I would have had serious issues working together.
Yeah, I think a lot of people did. I mean, there's a quote in one of the books from him where he once admitted that he is simply badly made. And I think that's true. Like, as good as he was as a visionary and on the tech side, as bad was the personal side.
Kelly, how about you?
Well, we talked about it this morning on TDO, which I'm pointing out because, like Brittany, Charlotte Henry over at the Mac Observer was not a very close Apple watcher at the time. So she sort of she mostly was observing Apple like professionally or semi-professionally, depending on your assessment of the MacObserver.com. She was like, her assessment comes from the Tim Cook era. And so I had her on, and Brian Chaffin, because Mac Observer was founded in 1997 and 97. And so we talked about like what it was like to talk about Apple then, and what Apple meant and what sort of cultural impact it had, under Steve versus under Tim. And the difference is pretty dramatic. And part of the reason that we wanted to have that conversation was because of those two different aspects of Apple. And there's like, for every good story that someone has about Steve, someone else has a story about him being terrible. I mean, there's no question. And if you keep shaking that tree of Steve Jobs stories, you will probably find that more of them are bad than good overall. Like, he did not, in a whole lot of ways, he did not seem to care a whole lot about other people's assessments of him. And in some ways that worked to his advantage, because it made it possible for him to do things like make the iPod a reality and things like that. But, the thing I will say, I'm going to channel my inner Jay here and kick a hornet's nest. Because Jay, do you need popcorn? Will you be right back? Okay. The thing that struck me today is that because it's been 10 years, we got like this sort of orchestrated PR campaign, it felt like, because we got Johnny Ive in the Wall Street Journal talking about what great friends they were and having lunch with him every day and on and on. And then we got the little movie that they put up at the top of apple.com that's a nice thing, talking about all these nice things about Steve and what a visionary he was and all these. And we get the memo that went around internally that everybody knew was going to go public, so of course when Tim wrote it, he sort of had to write it not just for the audience that he sent it to, but for all the rest of us on the outside. And I think that there's a certain amount of that feels a little bit like we're doing our best to rewrite some of that legacy and make people forget about the story of the story about the iPod being too big, and the story about, shouting at somebody's receptionist, and the story about all these things that I think are also part of him. And that's not to say that like that he was good or that he was bad or anything like that. Like, I'm not making any value judgments about anybody. That's not for me. I do not ever get to be that person. I'm never going to be. So the thing that I think he did that was interesting was democratize a lot of technology that most people did not think was something that they could have in their house initially, and then in their pockets. And that's a thing that he did that no one else really ever found a way to do quite as effectively. And what Tim Cook has done with the company going forward, like that's a very interesting conversation for another day. But because he's also been running things for 10 years, that's the other thing that sort of got lost in all of this narrative, is that Apple went from being a company where you had to find somebody who had the link that they could give you so that you could watch the live stream of whatever the Apple event was that was showing you what Mac OS 8 looked like or whatever, to where we are now, where Apple does anything that might be interesting and all of a sudden it's all over like every network morning chat show, all over the country, like everywhere, everybody's talking about whatever it is that Apple did next. And the difference between those two companies is dramatic to me. And that, I think, is way more interesting. What has happened at Apple as a company, way, way more than Steve himself. And if we're all going to have to share Steve's stories, I shook his hand once at an Apple event and that was it. And that's all it was, because their booth was across from where the booth was where I was working at Macworld one time. And he happened to go by and I said hello and shook his hand, and that was it. And that like was my entire interaction with him. But like, I think that there's been a whole lot of cleanup of his image that has been trying to happen in the last little while. And it's gonna all, I mean, people liken him to Walt Disney a lot. And I feel like, the more we find out about Walt Disney, that feels like a pretty apt comparison. So in that, like in life, maybe he was not a shining example of humanity all of the time, which is what everybody wants him to be. And he kind of wasn't. And there you go. So
Warren?
Yeah, I mean, somebody said, a bunch of people say, if you're managing a large group of people and you're not hated by some of them, you're not doing your job, because, change is what drives, companies
Innovation.
to do better, and innovation, and people don't like change, especially the people you're managing, because they have to do more work to change. And as far as, what Kelly said is, people's images, I mean, everybody, Alex Trebek, you're going to start hearing about things that he might have done in his life. And it's just, you can't think about it. You just got to like, you got to like the person for what they did and not what they are and who they were. But my feeling about Steve, and I'm going to go on a slight quick rant, but it has to do with Star Wars and Star Trek and the right to repair, because let me go with this. Yeah, I know. I see Chuck. So Steve Jobs at one point said he wants the future to be Star Trek. He wants everything to be little portable, solid state communicators. He wants you to talk to computers. He wants everything to basically be disposable and replaceable. When the Enterprise gets destroyed, what happens? They bring out a whole new Enterprise. And compared that to Star Trek, which is a whole, universe of rusty robots fixing other rusty things and ships, that's what he didn't want. So what he brought to the table was this. And what this is a thing that's not meant to be repaired. It's not something that Captain Kirk would have said, I need IT support to disassemble this thing, because that's what they had. And that, to me, is the future. The future is, things that maybe could be recycled, that are very portable or very intuitive, and you don't have to worry about how it works. And that's what Steve wanted.
Okay. Congratulations. I had no idea how you were going to bring that one back, and you did.
That wasn't terrific. I pulled off.
That was good. That was good.
Thanks.
Mark, you're kind of quiet, and you are in business in Silicon Valley, and so you have to have some thoughts on Steve from a lot of different angles, I would think.
Well, I've known people who've had personal business dealings with him, and stories I don't think should be aired in this forum. But just looking at him, he had I guess a combination of good sense of being born in the right year, that he was teed up to sort of be one of the co-founders of the personal computer revolution. Certainly, bringing desktop publishing into the masses, you have to give him credit for. Then fast forward, a couple years, iPod, digital music in your pocket, digital photography, although they may not have created that trend, certainly they made the Mac the center of a lot of digital hubs for photography, and then video. Then the phone, which is really a computer in your pocket. Call to phone, which just is still 14 years later, I think, the biggest head fake ever. You created tablets, you changed the way music is sold and distributed, and saved the music industry from bankruptcy, from piracy. So he's created, he's done a lot. But he has his flaws, and over time, people forget all the bad stories and things, and they just tend to focus on what somebody achieved, and ultimately what their lasting contributions are to our world and universe. I mean, I'm sure if you go back, Andrew Carnegie had a lot of bad points, although I don't know what they were, and I'm sure Thomas Edison had a lot of bad points, although I don't know what they were. But when people look back in time, they
go get your lunch. I can fill you in on Thomas Edison.
See, that's what I mean. Over time, people
yielded Jim Secretary too.
What people have contributed. So, certainly in the Valley, there's a whole sorts of other industries that either he may not have developed, but he certainly was pioneering a lot of new things. And certainly he and Apple and what was it, Mansfield, Bob Mansfield, Chuck Mansfield, they really made a dramatic turn in terms of how consumer devices are constructed. While everybody and all the Harvard MBAs and everything out there was saying componentization and commoditization and blah, 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 these guys had the deep insight that no, if you make everything on a single die, it can get faster and less expensive, and you can capture huge margins, and you can make better products. So, it's been quite a while, I think, since we've heard about, the holy god Clay Christensen and his disruption theory, because I think clearly Apple showed that it's not a universal theory that applies across the entire universe, and they've certainly revolutionized, and you can see it now. Ultimate tribute, right? Imitation is the highest form of flattery. Microsoft with their Surface is imitation, is flattering, just like they did when they stole the interface to the Mac for some of the original products. So, yeah, it's been 10 years. I don't think anyone cries uncontrollably anymore that he's gone. The whole universe is seeing that Apple can flourish without him. So now it's just a matter of, okay, it's October 5th. It's an anniversary date. Let's move forward.
The Mac Voices panel will be back in the next edition of Mac Voices to finish up this conversation. We have more about the impact of Steve Jobs 10 years after his death. And we also have a discussion of a number of security measures and tips and tricks that can hopefully make your Cybersecurity Awareness Month of October a little bit better. That's next time on Mac Voices. Until then, and as always, I'm Chuck Joyner. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.